think it's like 5 or 6 questions, but certainly a good thing to remember to do. So April 24th, Wednesday, please make sure to get that done. Okay. So with the idea of fruit formation, in general, you need to have successful pollination first. Okay. There's an exception to that, which we'll talk about, but in general, we need to see pollination occurring and then fertilization of the egg. And if those occur, then you should start to kick into fruit formation. When you say the word fruit, I'm guessing most of you will think about like an orange or an apple or a pear, which is totally acceptable. So this is the anatomy of a fleshy fruit. Okay, so this is a fleshy fruit. We're going to find out that there's fleshy fruit and there's dry fruit. Please know the anatomy as listed here. So you have, starting from the outside, you have the so-called exocarp on the outside of the fruit. The mesocarp is often fleshy and juicy. And then you have an endocarp area that's a little tougher. This one has a pit, so it's really tough. But in general, there's the endocarp where you see less fleshy fruit, if not a stone. And then the seed inside. And then so that's kind of the words here. That's the fleshy. This pericarp term, that's also on here. The pericarp term is reserved for if you have a very thin exo, meso, endo. All three of those regions are super thin and kind of fused together, then we call it a pericarp. So when you look at the pericarp idea, that's usually when we start thinking about dry fruits. Okay, dry fruits. But it's important that you understand pericarp is just those three sections. They've been thinned down and fused. Okay, and we'll look at examples of dry fruits in a little bit. So again, going back to this idea that you need to have pollination first, the transfer of the pollen from the anther to the stigma. Here you have a perfect flower, so theoretically it might just be going from one of those anthers right to the stigma. Although remember, a lot of plants prefer to have pollen from a different plant. They want to do cross-pollination. And so there might be pollinators involved to get the pollen delivered to the stigma. Then, if everything goes okay and the sperm fertilizes the egg, and remember that second sperm also involved. I don't know if I ever explicitly said the term, the famous term. Double fertilization. I can't remember if I. Double fertilization. So double fertilization is the idea where you have one of the sperm from the pollen will fertilize, fuse with the egg, I should say. Fuse with the egg, and then the second sperm fuses with those central polar nuclei, central cell in the polar nuclei. And then that will form the endosperm. So double fertilization, both of the sperm are involved when you look at the angiosperm life cycle. So then if that goes as predicted, then as soon as that occurs, you're going to have the fertilized egg, which is now called the zygote, starting to grow, just lots of mitosis, grows into an embryo, grows and grows and grows into the baby sporophyte inside the seed. And when you look at the idea of fruit formation, you're intended to move into the ovary, the tissue that we're thinking about, and that's a pretty massive shifting in appearance and function. And then there may be other parts of the flower involved with some fruits. When you look at the fruit in total, there may be receptacle tissue right below the ovary. Sometimes the receptacle tissue plays a role in that fruit when you look at So we have fleshy fruit. So you're thinking about apples, oranges, and plums, and tangerines, all that kind of stuff. Dry, on the other hand, is when you have the middle part all thinned out and fused. No fleshy part, really. So that's one of the first things. If you come upon a fruit and you're like, oh, I wonder what kind of fruit this is, and you try and classify it, that's the first thing you ask yourself. Is it fleshy or is it dry? And then this is another question you ask yourself. If and how they split open at maturity. And they have, a database of all these different fruits, how they will split open. And so some fruits won't split open. They have to be like broken open by a disperser of some sort. Other fruits will break open, and we'll go through some examples of that. Then you also look to see, well, how many ovaries might have been involved in the formation of this fruit. And that goes back to flower design. What did the flower look like? Did it have, was it an inflorescence? Something like that. And so the idea is you need to know your flower anatomy in order to answer some of these questions, as well as the idea that you could see other parts of the flower being involved in the fruit formation. It's not just the ovary. So when you go to lab this week, you'll be looking at a bunch of different fruits. You might want to come a little bit hungry because after you dissect, you're able to sample. And you'll basically be keying them out. Looking at, we'll give you like a dichotomous key type idea, and you'll be keying them out and looking at them. So the definition of a fruit, if you look that up, that's what's being written here. That's actually the definition. A fruit is a mature ovary plus or minus additional flower. So again, looking at the flower, we're zooming into the ovary. And then depending on the fruit, you may have some other tissue, but for sure the ovary is involved. All right. Well, sometimes you're going to see on those keys when you look at them, they'll say, oh, it's a simple fruit. That means there's just a single ovary that developed into the fruit that you're looking at. An example would be cherry. You might have an aggregate fruit. This is a single flower, but in that flower there are ovaries. So the ovaries are aggregated together in that single flower. Blackberry, or blackberry picking, raspberry picking. Multiple. So when you think about multiple fruits, you're thinking about a cluster, multiple flowers. You think about multiple fruit and multiple flowers. Multiple ovaries as well, because you have multiple flowers, so you're going to have multiple ovaries. All right, so you have this idea of an inflorescence. Many, many flowers clustered together, so that means, by definition, many ovaries. So the pineapple is a classic example of multiple fruit. But so is corn, which a lot of people don't even realize is a fruit. So we'll look at corn more carefully, but when you look at the corn on the cob, each kernel is technically a fruit. It's a dry fruit, it's dry, but it's a fruit. And it's a grain type of fruit. And then the last category, when you look at fruit design, are the accessory fruits. Those are the example where you do have additional flower parts playing a role. And very often it's the receptacle. Remember, that's the stalk right below the ovary, the tip of the stalk, the flower stalk. So strawberries, actually. So when you eat a strawberry, the red splash, the really sweet red splash, that's the receptacle tissue that you're eating. That's morphed into that very lovely, tasty strawberry. Apples, though, too. When you eat an apple, most of that tissue is receptacle. And then wintergreen. Okay, so those examples of fruits. So going back to, please know what the definitions are for each of the simple, aggregate, multiple, accessory. Okay. This next image gives some more examples of simple fruit here. They're showing pea. So again, a lot of people don't even know that peas in a pod are actually, that's fruit. It's a dry fruit. And so they're trying to dissect the different parts where you can see the ovaries and then the development of the seed within. Yes. No, the whole pod. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Raspberries and blackberries are aggregate. So aggregate means it's still just one flower, but multiple ovaries. Here they've labeled it as carpels. That's where the ovaries are. And then the pineapple, multiple fruit, means you have multiple flowers. So each section of the pineapple fruit that you look at was a flower. And I'll show you a picture of, well, they have the picture up here. And then the accessory fruit, most of the flesh of the apple is actually receptacle tissue. I remember when I first learned that when I was in middle school and I didn't believe the teacher. I'm like, how could a beautiful apple flower morph into this robust apple? And all of this. I just thought it was bizarre. He was right. Okay. So this is, I think, the lab manual. You'll be working with this in lab. So the main point we're trying to get you to think about is kind of the big picture ideas, like is it simples and multiples and those ideas. We're not going to ask you to memorize examples of everything. That's easy for you to look up. But more of the big picture idea, fleshier and dry, and then looking at that idea of, is it simple? Is it multiple? Is it aggregate? And then when you dissect the fruit in lab, you'll be looking for, how many seeds are in there and trying to dissect the different parts of both fleshy and dry fruits. So they, as you saw, I don't know if you can see there. Well, we'll go through some of those in more detail. So palms are accessory fruit. Drupes are another type of where you have a stone, so to speak, in the middle, in the endocarp area. So, usually if you say the word fruit, those seem normal, like, yeah, okay. But here's another idea of a fruit, which is a tomato, which a lot of people would say, no, that's a vegetable. But remember, the definition of a fruit is a mature ovary. And so you have to think about tomato flower. If you've ever grown tomatoes in your garden, you are starting to grow flower. And then hopefully that egg, did get fertilized, went through double fertilization, so the formation of an endosperm, and then that flower, primarily the ovary, starts to morph into that juicy tomato fruit, not a vegetable. Hesperidium is on that chart as well. You'll look at some of those. Very classic, leathery. And then you have the pepos, looking at the different squashes, watermelon, cucumbers. So this is mainly the cucumber family that we're looking at. Okay, aggregate. So again, one flower. Aggregate is one flower, but many, many ovaries in that one flower. Aggregated together into one flower. If you've ever looked at raspberry or blackberry flowers, you can see, if you, especially if you use a hand lens, that they do have that multiple ovaries or carpels. So pineapple can be classified as a multi-fruit. That then, if everything goes okay, has morphed into that fleshy fruit, multiple fruit. All right, so, you know, fruits, there's a lot of fruits that you've grown up with that, you know, are easy to think about as the traditional fruit example. Dry fruits take a little bit more thought. Most people don't even realize they're fruits. So dry fruits, when you look at them, you can sub-categorize them. We have dehiscent is one subcategory. So this is getting at how do they break open? If they're dehiscent, they will break open, freeing the seed. Legumes are a special case. They're dehiscent dry fruits. If you look up the definition of a legume, often it's provided in this way. They'll say it's a plant whose fruit splits along both seams. And so both seams of the fruit will split open upon maturity, releasing the seeds. So that's often a definition that they'll use for legumes. And then indehiscent are seeds that stay in. The fruit doesn't split open. And even when it's released from the mother plant, it's still shut, closed up still. And that usually requires some special extra effort to get it to go ahead and germinate and grow. So dandelions actually are a good example of this. Hazelnut. So you've played with dandelion fruits, you just didn't probably realize it. So when you take the dandelion and you blow on it to get the parachute to fly off, right at the base of the parachute, there's this little dry, wrinkly thing. That's the dry fruit. And then it has that fluffy parachute. I have a picture here somewhere. So the legumes are the Fabaceae family. They're dry fruits. They're dehiscent, means that their fruit was split open along both seams. So beans, a variety of different beans, peanuts in a shell. Those are legumes. Lentils, soybeans. So there's lots of legumes that are used for commercial crop production and in part of our diet. I once had a student ask about peanuts in the shell. I'm like, are you sure that's a fruit? Because they're underground. And I've never been to a peanut farm where they are, you know, growing them. So they don't grow this far north. So that stumped me for a minute. I'm like, no, it's a fruit. But he was right. You have to dig up the peanuts when you harvest them. It's like, okay, but I know it comes from a flower, but the flowers are above ground. So that was like, okay, I gotta Google that one. And so it finally found a good site where they describe this bizarre situation. Yes, the flowers are above ground. If they're successfully pollinated, they're actually flour embeds into the soil, and then the peanut forms. Isn't that bizarre? I don't know exactly why. Has anyone learned why they have this behavior? It's kind of bizarre. As far as I know, it's the only one that does this. I may be wrong, but the one that I'm aware of. I don't know why it would do this, unless maybe burying the fruit underground protects it from getting eaten, like overeaten, like all of it gobbled up, maybe. That's about the best I can come up with. So I don't know. It's very bizarre. So when you eat peanuts in a shell, most of what you're eating is the cotyledons, the seed leaves. So that most of the peanut that you're eating is cotyledon tissue. There's two cotyledons, and then you can see that the embryo is quite small. So yes, it's a dry fruit, and then when you eat, uh, it's mostly the cotyledons. Very nutritious. So schizocarps, another kind of dry fruit. And again, like we're not going to ask you, give us an example of a schizocarp. We're not going to do that. Just get you to think about dry fruits in general, dehiscent versus indehiscent. Legumes would be a good one to know. I would like you to know legumes, that they're dehiscent and that they split open along both seams. And some examples of legumes. I think that would be important concept to capture. So how many, I mean, I'm sure you played with these at some point in your life, winging them up in the air and watching them twirl around. So those are dry fruits. That's the dry fruit with the wing appendage for dispersal. Very fun fruits to play with. So technically it's a Samara and a Schizocarp, but again, we're not gonna ask you that level of detail. But if you were ever to like go and key out things, like if you had a field guide with you and you wanted to key out things, these types of terms you would be asked to look at. And so you can see really well adapted for wind dispersal primarily. You know, they're just well designed. They're like airplane wings. The leaks. You can split it open. So many, many interesting fruit designs. So again, corn, like most people would say it's a vegetable, but it came from a flower. So by definition, thinking about fruit. So the um, corn on the cob, pretty nice picture showing the silk. That's the stigma and style. And then before the kernel shows up, if you wherever to open the flower for pollination, these are ovaries. So many, many ovaries, inflorescence. And when you look at a corn on the cob here in cross section, that's the central part of the fruit receptacle. That is fruit. So each kernel is a dry fruit, and they're attached to the receptacle. That makes the corn on the cob. It's pretty impressive though that the pollen has to get all the way down that silk and make it to the ovary. You may have noticed if you've eaten corn on the cob, once you either when you're shucking the corn or eating it, that there's like blank spots where no kernels formed. It's usually toward the tip of the corn on the cob, but not always. Sometimes it's dispersed. That just means that particular ovary, the egg inside didn't get fertilized. And so it never developed into a fruit. So if there was not, if that area did not have successful double fertilization going on, it'll just look like a blank spot on the front end. So think about that when you're shucking corn this summer. Achenes are this idea where when you look at the surface of a strawberry fruit, it's actually many fruits. The achenes are the fruit. So when you look at a strawberry, there's many dry fruits on that strawberry. So each achene, and all the red is the receptacle tissue that has morphed into that very flashy red when it's ripe and very sweet. So again, the acne way back. Applying to fruit tissues, but anyways, trying to look at this idea that red is receptacle from the flower stalk essentially, and then all the achenes are the dried fruit. There's follicles. Milkweed is a good example of that. Again, we're not going to ask you what's a follicle, give an example, but just getting you to appreciate the diversity. Nuts. Coconut, again. Well designed, actually, when you look at the coconut that you get in the store, by the way, is not what it looks like on the tree. They've removed parts of it so that it's easier for shipping. It's lighter. So you see that you're getting just the inner part, which reminds me, you got to make sure that there's a hammer in the lab. Might need a hammer to open some of these. Anyways, with the coconut, well, it's well designed when the fruit drops off the tree in its full form. It's well designed. It's buoyant. It's very buoyant. It has air sacs, so to speak, to allow it to float away. So it's well designed for water dispersal. And then grains are kind of a special case. Referred to as Coreopsis. But again, those are dry fruits, right? Dry fruits, so barley, wheat, things like that. So I think this is from your book. So this is kind of a nice comparison all in one table. Looking here, they start off with some examples of simple fleshy fruits. And then you get into dry fruits, giving some examples. Okay, here's an exception. So we said fruit comes from mature ovaries, which means that you have, the seeds inside. The seed development occurred because you had successful double fertilization going on. Here, this is the idea where you still get fruits, but it didn't happen with pollination. That didn't happen first. And because of that, you didn't get any seeds either. So they're seedless fruits. Now, we've engineered seedless fruits. We've made that happen, and you can do that if you hit the flower at the right time of its development with certain hormones. You can shift into seedless fruit formation. But you can get just natural cases of it, like it happens just naturally. Some plants can do this. And it's kind of weird that it happens naturally. They still don't quite understand that process, but they know it's under hormonal control, at least because we know that when we spray auxin to the flower, it will shift into fruit formation, even though it hasn't pollinated yet. Now, it's big business because in general, humans don't like to mess around with seeds when they're eating, especially if they're larger seeds. So seedless fruit is big business, and we like that, pay for it. And so bananas, of course, are a good example. Sometimes you see like little remnants of seeds in the banana flesh if you look carefully. But there's all kinds of seedless fruit. In fact, I have a hard time this Thursday when we do the fruit lab trying to find certain fruits that still have seeds in them in the store. You know, it's hard. Like grapes, finding grapes that have seeds in them for sale can be almost impossible sometimes. So the idea here is people don't like to mess around with seeds, so they'll pay for the seedless fruit idea. And so this is a lot of human intervention to get those types of products in the supermarket for us. I take issue with watermelon. Oh, I like seeds in my watermelon. That was one of my favorite pastimes when I was a kid, was to have competitions of how far you could spit them. I have very fond memories of that. And now they're just boring. There's no seeds. So, but it's an interesting situation. They are trying to figure out more details of how it happens naturally. Here's another really interesting idea. Apomixis. So please, so make sure that you keep parthenocarpic and apomixis fruits separate in your head. I'll be asking about both of these. Apomixis means without mixing, literally. If you look up that word, that's what it means, without mixing. Okay, what they're trying to get at here is that you don't have chromosomes mixing up. So what that means is you didn't have sperm and egg fusing. Didn't have that going on, which is weird. You get a seed, but there was no sperm involved in first. Okay, and so this is very, very odd. So what you get are what it is just asexual seeds. So seed forms, but it's a clone of the mother plant. It's really strange. So asexual seeds. And so it's like a clone. Now this has got a lot of plant biologists really excited because it's this idea that if you find the perfect plant and you could get it to do this apomixis, think of all the seeds you get from that. And then you could have that plant over and over and over, perfect plant. And so they're very, very interested in this. There's a lot of research trying to better understand this. You know, can we use this for certain commercial crops that where we want that consistent, you know, awesome plant to keep getting produced. So technically, dandelions can do this naturally. And dandelions are amazing plants. I don't know why we have such a negative, you know, that your lawn can't have a dandelion in it. It's like, what? I don't know. There's that joke. I don't know. Maybe I still have it somewhere on my hard drive. Have you ever heard that? It's like a discussion of why people have lawns, and it's a discussion between God and somebody, and he's talking about, you know, the creation of grasses and plants, and then the other person he's talking to starts talking about, yeah, but then humans went ahead and created these lawns, and God's like, why? And it's just a very humorous take on our kind of unusual opinions, I guess, about lawns and how they should be. So if I find it, I'll post it. It's humorous. Anyways, dandelions, amazing plant. You can use them, but all parts of the dandelion plant you can use. They're so useful. But anyways, and they can do apomixis. How cool is that? Blackberries are another example. They can do this. So like I said, lots of scientists are like, ooh, this could be really big. Corn production, we're looking at it, especially for corn. Corn production is labor intensive. because of how they have to create hybrid vigor every year, and it's just a lot of labor cost. And so they're really looking at, could we somehow work apomixis with the corn plant? And they're looking at other plants too. So they're studying dandelions and they're studying blackberries, trying to figure out how this occurs, and then seeing if they can apply that knowledge. So there's a separate posting in the, can't remember if it's in the PowerPoint slide section or in the reading section on apomixis, where they talk about the blackberry and gamagrass. So they're interested in gamagrass because it can do apomixis and it's somewhat related to corn. And so if their thought is if they can figure out how gamagrass does it, maybe then they can turn their attention to the corn plant and apply that knowledge and see what they can do with the modern corn that we have. So asexual seeds, really interesting. Well, let's say everything goes okay and the plant, the flower, attracts the pollinator. You get fusion of the sperm with the egg, fusion of the second sperm with the polar nuclei, and then that grows into the endosperm. You get seed production, you get fruit production. Everything's going okay. Then the idea is you don't necessarily want all the fruit to drop to the base of the mother plant and germinate there. You often want it to go to distant habitats, set up camp somewhere else. And so now we're thinking about the design of the fruit and what might be its mechanism of dispersal. Animals, including us, we're very visual. We like to see those colors, bright colors. We're very attracted to sweet tastes. Sweet usually means it's non-poisonous. That's kind of hardwired into us. If we taste something bitter, we usually spit it out, and that goes back to the days of bitter usually means poison. And so sweet usually means it's safe to eat. We're very visual. We like bright colors. So if the fruit is a different color than green, because most leaves are green, then that's usually going to attract the seed disperser, fruit disperser. And if you've ever, waited for the banana to ripen, they start out green, which makes sense if you think about it for a second, because if the fruits generally start out green, they're blending into the leaf background, which is good because inside the fruit is still busy trying to get to maturity. So you don't want a fruit disperser to come and grab the fruit off the mother plant too early if the seeds aren't ready to go. That would be terrible for the plant. So make it so that it stays camouflaged. And in general, too, if you were to taste a green fruit, unripe fruit doesn't taste good. And so that is a really good strategy. Only shift into displaying, in this case, it's usually a visual bright color. It gets really sweet. That's then the seeds inside are fully mature. They're ready to get out in the world and germinate and grow. So we often prefer that red against a green background is very easy to spot for our eyesight as well as many other fruit dispersers. Not all fruit, but many are bright like that. And then I think if you thought about it for a minute, you would agree that all of these are excellent examples of wind dispersal, where they don't really have another organism coming along. So again, with the dandelion, all the fluff on there, it kind of get up into the wind, but it's very safe. The dried fruit. But all of these are excellent examples. Orchid seeds are very dust-like. They can stay in the wind current for very long stretches. Cottonwood, tumbleweed. So very interesting adaptations so that they can get up into the air current, hopefully get far enough away from the mother plant that they aren't competing directly and they'll find new habitat. And then here's some other strategies that are more not like grabbing it to eat it. And that's, well, some of these are pretty nasty, where they have these very nasty appendages that will hook into the flesh of the hoof or onto the hair. If you have a hunting dog that you've taken out, you know, not just a hunting dog, but you know what I mean, with the hairs on their legs, and then they go running into a grassy area and they come back with all the furs on them. Mistletoe berries. So that is bird. There's a bird. There's a mistletoe bird that will disperse that. I wonder if I have the, might be in a future slide here. Yeah. So I mean, look at those hooks. Wasn't Velcro designed from this? I'm pretty sure. Boy, if he patented it correctly, he should be like a billionaire by now, don't you think? He's on a beach somewhere drinking a margarita. That's amazing. Amazing design. Look at it. Technically, I don't know if they would call it that. That's a good question. They're tougher. So I don't know if that tissue is strictly just epidermis tissue. I'd have to look into that and see. And then the top left is that's the one where you step on it. Or the pad of the elephant. And then after a while, you know, that the giraffe or the elephant will keep walking with that in their foot, and then eventually it drops off. It will, you know, come out, and then hopefully it'll land in a spot where it can grow. So this is the mistletoe berries on a tree branch. And so I can't remember, did I tell you about the mistletoe bird? How they can eat it? And I guess it's pretty quick. The video should be still active in the notes section if you want to look at it. There's a couple of links there, so hopefully one of them will work. But it goes through their digestive tract like within a half hour or something, and then they poop it out, and it's super sticky. So it just sticks to their butt. They don't like it, and so they end up brushing it off. You can watch. It's hilarious. If you need a little bit of a laugh, pull up the video because it shows the bird like going along the branch, you know, really like get off, and it's wiping its butt. And then finally the fruit, you know, gets free of the butt, but then it immediately plugs into the branch. And they show nice videography of the radicle coming out and plugging into the branch. Because I mean, their mistletoe are up on branches. It's like, well, how did they get there? You know, how in the world did they end up there to begin with? The mistletoe birds that are doing that. So again, this idea of looking at the fruit, whether it's dry or fleshy, and then imagining how that would get dispersed. And it could be through an animal, birds, but wind, water. And then there's some pretty interesting strategies. This video is really cool too, because this is erodium, and it's amazing corkscrew design like that. Very tough, pointed core to the dried fruit. And they show the, it just kind of pierces into the soil, and then it kind of screws right into the soil. It's just amazing. So these kinds of adaptations are just really fun to think about. Banana, by the way, some students have asked how it is plantations, banana plantations, they usually come up from suckers, you know, every year. And I think this is the, they refer to banana fields or banana plants as walking plants or something like that, because the field keeps kind of shifting as new plants keep coming up. But anyway, we have a banana tree in the greenhouse. Seems to be doing okay. And it's the banana, it's the species that no longer is used in commercial crop production. It's the one prior to that, because the one we currently have, so the one that's in the greenhouse, a disease wiped out most of the commercial crop of that banana species. And now they're on to this one. Oh, let me see if I can pull up that video really quick. Oh, I can't do it that way. Hang on. Eh, why isn't it letting me?